The grand chamber of the Galactic Dominion stood in eerie silence, the light from the towering crystalline walls casting reflections across the faces of gathered leaders. At the center, the supreme warlord rose, his armored frame towering over the lesser beings before him. His voice carried the weight of centuries of conquest, the tone unwavering. "The species known as humans have defied the Dominion," he announced. "They refused to acknowledge our authority. Their actions demand annihilation." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some species scoffed at the notion of humans posing any real threat. Others, those who had encountered them, remained silent. The Dominion had crushed thousands of civilizations before. What made this one any different? A diplomat from the fringes of the council spoke hesitantly. "Are they truly worth our attention? Their reach is insignificant, their fleets primitive. Surely a single fleet will be enough." The warlord's gaze settled on the diplomat, unamused. "They will be an example. There will be no negotiations, no surrender." The declaration was broadcast across the Dominion's network, relayed to every corner of their vast empire. Planets burned at the command of the Dominion before. This would be no different. And then, a response arrived. It was a simple message, sent in perfect, unaccented galactic common. Not pleading, not fearful, just a single statement. "Congratulations. You just declared war on the deadliest species in the galaxy." The chamber grew quiet again. The warlord smirked at the audacity, dismissing it as primitive bravado. A flick of his claws and the fleets were mobilized. Thousands of warships, forged in the great shipyards of the Dominion, set course for the Sol system, the largest armada in centuries, moving like a tidal wave toward an insignificant blue planet. The warlords did not anticipate resistance. The first reports arrived from the initial scouting forces. They were strange. The humans did not panic. No distress signals, no desperate broadcasts for help. Instead, Earth's orbital defenses activated with eerie precision. Networks that should have been decades behind Dominion technology moved with seamless efficiency. A single squadron was lost, vanished entirely. No wreckage, no distress beacons, simply gone. Yet the Dominion commanders laughed. A minor inconvenience. They would take Earth before the week was over. The primary fleet entered the system in formation, their dreadnoughts blackening the stars. They did not fire immediately. First, they made their demands clear. Their translators relayed the message across all human frequencies. "This is the will of the Galactic Dominion. Surrender, and you will be permitted to live under our rule. Resist, and you will be eradicated." For a full minute, silence. Then, a single human voice. Calm, collected. "Proceed at your own risk." The Dominion commanders exchanged amused glances. A last, pitiful display of defiance. The order was given. Their warships advanced. And then everything changed. The first anomaly came from their communication arrays. Complete blackout. Not interference. Not jamming. Total silence. Their fleet, once a unified force, suddenly operated in isolation. A minor inconvenience, they believed. Then their targeting systems faltered. Shields deactivated. Power fluctuations rippled through their ships. Confusion turned to alarm. Then the first explosions erupted, not from human weapons but from within their own ships. Systems overloading, reactors failing. And that was when humanity struck. They did not attack in formation like the Dominion expected. No grand battleships to challenge the fleet. Instead, swarms of unmanned drones descended from every angle, exploiting blind spots the Dominion didn't realize they had. They weren't engaging in battle. They were dismantling them. Dominion warships, designed for overwhelming force, were unprepared for an enemy that fought like a phantom. No direct confrontations. No predictable tactics. Just precision strikes targeting engines, command centers, supply chains. Within the first hour, the Dominion fleet had lost a third of its forces, and they still had not fired upon a single manned human warship. The warlord observed from orbit, his claws tightening. This was not the war he had prepared for. This was something else entirely. The enemy was invisible, indistinct, impossible to anticipate. And then the final message arrived. Not from a diplomat, not from a commander, but from the humans themselves, broadcasting across the Dominion's own compromised systems. A single statement spoken in flawless galactic common. This was your first mistake. The warlord's blood ran cold. The Dominion's fleet was in disarray. The battle should have been won within hours, yet it had become something else entirely. A slow, calculated dismantling. The warlord watched from the bridge of his command ship, his claws gripping the console as his admirals struggled to restore order. Communications remained severed, and reports from the front lines were incomplete, fragmented. The humans were not fighting a war. They were waging something far worse. The invasion forces that had reached the surface expected a quick campaign. Standard planetary subjugation procedures had been followed. Overwhelming force, planetary bombardment, deployment of shock troops. And yet, something was wrong. The cities were empty. Not in the way of a panicked evacuation, but in a way that felt deliberate. Entire metropolitan areas abandoned, yet the power grids remained active, the systems running as if the inhabitants had simply stepped away. The Dominion soldiers moved incautiously, weapons at the ready. No resistance, no sign of military presence. It was as if the humans had fled. Then, one by one, the squads stopped responding. The first bodies were found hours later. Dominion soldiers untouched, their armor unscathed, their weapons still in their hands. Expressions frozen in something unfamiliar. Not pain, not rage, but terror. The commanders demanded explanations. Their medics scanned the corpses, searching for any sign of what had killed them. No wounds, no biological attacks, no toxins. They had died of pure, unfiltered fear. The survivors whispered of things they had seen in the shadows. Unnatural movements, shapes that disappeared when looked at directly, sounds faint, unsettling. Laughter, human laughter. The Dominion had invaded thousands of worlds, faced countless enemies, but never this. Never an enemy that refused to meet them on the battlefield, instead pulling them into the depths of paranoia. The first real counterattack came at night. Not with orbital strikes, not with grand battles. It began with whispers over their comms, whispers in their own language, spoken in the exact tone of their own commanders, giving false orders. Troops moved unknowingly into ambushes, led by voices they trusted. Then came the sound attacks, inhuman frequencies that scrambled their thoughts, sent them into disoriented confusion. Some fired blindly into the dark, hitting nothing. Others simply dropped their weapons and ran. The Dominion's elite shock troopers, engineered for unwavering loyalty, began breaking ranks. Not from battle, not from injury, but from the slow, creeping horror that they were no longer in control. And then the real attacks began. Not open warfare, not grand declarations of defiance, just destruction. EMP blasts disabled entire battalions, leaving Dominion soldiers blind and deaf in hostile territory. Supply lines vanished. Convoys destroyed without a trace. Their remains left out in the open as warnings. The first Dominion officers who surrendered were not captured. They were sent back, unharmed. But they were not the same. They spoke in fragmented sentences, repeating phrases in galactic common, their voices shaking. Words that made no sense to the alien generals but carried a weight that unsettled them. They see everything. There is no escape. You should have never come here. The warlord watched the reports come in, each one worse than the last. This wasn't war. It wasn't resistance. It was something else, something they were not prepared for. The decision was made. The Dominion would pull back, regroup. They would return with greater force, stronger fleets. They had underestimated the humans, but they would not make the same mistake again. The recall order was sent. The remaining ground forces began their retreat, moving toward their designated extraction points. And that was when the final phase began. The humans had not been fighting to win the battle. They had been fighting to keep them there. As the Dominion ships prepared for departure, they realized the true extent of what had happened. Their supply chains were crippled. Their weapons had been subtly sabotaged. their navigational systems compromised. And then, before they could react, the sky lit up. Orbital defense platforms, hidden beneath Earth's surface, activated in perfect synchronization, not firing wildly, not targeting their battleships. They fired at the atmosphere itself. Controlled plasma bursts ignited the air around the Dominion's escape routes, turning their designated extraction zones into burning wastelands. Ships still on the ground were torn apart, entire fleets rendered useless before they could even take off. The warlord watched from orbit as thousands of his soldiers, the might of the Dominion, were left stranded on the surface. There was no panic, no desperate calls for reinforcements, only silence. And then one final message broadcasted across their compromised systems. "You are not leaving." The warlord felt something unfamiliar creeping into his mind. Not anger, not frustration, something he had not felt in centuries. Doubt. The warlord's hands curled into fists as he watched his forces crumble. What had begun as a routine conquest had devolved into something unrecognizable. His fleets, unmatched in firepower, were now crippled. His ground forces, engineered for absolute superiority, had been reduced to scattered remnants. The humans had not met them in open battle. They had controlled the battle, and now they were closing in. Attempts to regain control over the battlefield were failing. Every order he gave was intercepted, every countermeasure rendered useless before it could be executed. It was as if the humans knew his moves before he made them. Even the warlord, whose strategic genius had crushed empires, was being outplayed. His stranded forces, once proud and disciplined, had been reduced to frightened clusters hiding in ruins they had sought to conquer. They no longer marched in formation. They whispered among themselves, glancing over their shoulders at every shadow. Soldiers who had faced planetary purges without hesitation now hesitated at every turn. The humans were not hunting them. That would have been merciful. Instead, they let them wait. Days passed with no reinforcements, no supply drops, no communications. The Dominion troops attempted to set up defensible positions, but no matter where they went, the humans had already been there. Stockpiles were found ransacked, vehicles sabotaged in ways so precise it was clear they had not been destroyed for resources, but as a message. The message was clear. "We know where you are. We know what you need. We are watching." Some of the soldiers began deserting, not to fight, not to resist, but simply to run. A final act of defiance against the growing realization that they were never leaving this planet. But they didn't get far. Patrols sent to recover the deserters found nothing but their discarded weapons. Sometimes their armor, but never their bodies. And the whispers continued. Not in human languages. Not in garbled, distorted transmissions. The whispers came in the Dominion's own tongue. Perfectly spoken. Familiar. Voices of their own officers. Their own comrades. The last straw came when one of the Dominion's highest-ranking generals, a veteran of 100 planetary campaigns, was found sitting in the middle of a destroyed command post, his armor intact, his weapon untouched. He was staring at the sky, his mouth slightly open, as if he had been about to speak, but he never did. He was still breathing, still alive, but when his soldiers approached, they found his eyes wide and vacant. His mind was gone. The humans had broken him. The warlord's rage burned through the fear creeping into his thoughts. This could not be allowed to stand. He had conquered countless worlds, extinguished civilizations that had existed long before humanity ever left their home system. He would not be outmaneuvered by a species that had barely expanded beyond their own solar system. He still had resources. He still had fleets. And he still had options. Orders were given. The Dominion's remaining warships still in orbit repositioned. The strategy was no longer conquest, no longer occupation. It was eradication. If the humans refused to submit, if they refused to fight a conventional war, then he would reduce their world to nothing but ruin. The orbital bombardment sequence was initiated. Coordinates were locked. Power levels stabilized. And then nothing happened. Every system aboard the command ship flickered. The targeting arrays collapsed. Weapons refused to activate. It was as if the ships themselves had been hollowed out from the inside. Then came the final strike. The human fleet arrived not from deep space, not from distant colonies, but from within the Dominion's own formation. Stealth systems beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered had allowed them to slip in undetected, positioning themselves perfectly for the kill. The first Dominion dreadnought exploded before the warlord even registered the attack. The second followed moments later. His forces scrambled, but it was too late. The humans were no longer dismantling them, no longer stalking them in the shadows. Now they were destroying them. One by one, the Dominion ships fell. The warlord watched as the might of his empire was torn apart, not by superior numbers, not by overwhelming firepower, but by something far worse. By a species that had learned, that had adapted, and that had decided that this war would end on their terms. The warlord's final realization came not in anger, not in disbelief, but in something deeper, something colder. He had not invaded an empire. He had not challenged a mere species. He had provoked something far more dangerous. He had provoked humanity itself. The Dominion's fleet was gone. What had once been an armada capable of wiping out entire civilizations was now nothing more than scattered wreckage drifting in orbit. The few remaining warships that attempted to flee never made it past the system's edge. Every escape route had already been anticipated, every maneuver countered before it could even begin. The warlord stood alone on the bridge of his dying flagship. Fires raged around him, alarms blaring, warning of total system failure. He had no one left to command, no fleet to call upon. The Dominion's greatest military mind, brought to his knees by an enemy he had barely considered a threat. The humans had done more than win. They had ended the war before it had even truly begun. But it wasn't just strategy. It wasn't just superior technology or tactics. It was something deeper, something terrifying. They had studied the Dominion, understood them in ways that no other enemy ever had. They had dismantled them not just physically, but psychologically. They had waged war on every level, turning strength into weakness, confidence into fear. And now, at the very end, they had given him a choice. Surrender and live to tell the Dominion what had happened here. Or refuse, and become nothing more than another piece of debris floating in the void. For the first time in his existence, the warlord hesitated. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions. Never once had he considered surrender. But this wasn't a war anymore. It was a message. The Dominion had always believed they were the pinnacle of power, the apex of the galaxy. But the humans had revealed the truth. They were not the apex. They were prey. And humanity had simply chosen to stop hiding.